And this is our 16th time that Scott has graciously came here to answer all your questions. So we are very happy to have Scott here again. Let me just go quickly to some of our future talks before we start with Scott. On July 18, which I believe is 10 days from today, we're going to have Jeff Precise come again to talk about WinRT and proximity networking, and that should be a very interesting talk. And then we're going to have Michael Kennedy debut with us on July 30th to talk about MVC, ASP.NET MVC, and things you can do to make it better. And except from that, and our usual information about where you can get more information about Lidnug, I think we're going to start. Scott, are you ready?
All set.
Yeah, sounds good. Take it away.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. As kind of mentioned, this is a chat series that I've done a number of times before. It's pretty much any question is fair game. Meaning it's unplugged. I don't have any kind of prepared comments per se. I'll maybe start off with just a quick 5-minute summary, but then basically kind of shape the talk based on what you're interested in hearing. And so if you're in here, you'll notice there's a Q&A panel there. And so one of the things you can do is you can submit a question to me. It shows up my little manager list here. And basically what I'll try to do is answer as many questions as I can over the next 90 minutes. Again, any kind of question is fair game. What I usually try to do when I answer these questions is try to bucketize questions into categories. So if I don't answer your question immediately, don't worry. What I generally try to do is a bunch of server questions or a bunch of client questions or a bunch of Azure, a bunch of .NET, and kind of bump around from area to area, just so there's a little bit more continuity as opposed to me answering different questions that are different topics over and over again. So yeah, submit any question you want. Looks like the list is starting to fill up, which is great. And we'll go from there. In terms of kind of just a few high-level comments, I think hopefully this summer is going to be a kind of an exciting time for a number of spaces within Microsoft. We just had our Build conference about 2 weeks ago or a week and a half ago. And if you haven't had a chance to watch some of those talks there were a number of great announcements about things that are coming out. We talked about the next release of Windows, Windows 8.1, and took a preview of that. We talked about the next release of .NET and ASP.NET, and shipped previews of that. We talked about the next release of Visual Studio and shipped the preview of that. And then also shipped a number of updates for Windows Azure. Including the general availability release of our Windows Azure websites capability, which is a great way to build web apps on top of Azure, as well as our mobile services capability, which is a great way to build mobile backends. Both of those have a free tier that you can use for dev tasks for free forever, and you can also scale up in production. We also shipped a preview of some new Windows Azure Active Directory capabilities, both at Build, and then earlier today we released another update, which we'll be blogging about later this week, of new capabilities that we shipped in Windows Azure Active Directory there as well. Those include the ability to integrate your Active Directory with SaaS applications, so like Salesforce or Google Apps or Concur, Workday, or Box. All of those applications are now integrated with Windows Azure Active Directory, and enable you to do enterprise sign-on with them. We also shipped our new auto-scale capabilities, which allow you to take a website, mobile service, a VM, or a cloud service, and dynamically scale up or scale down the number of resources it uses based on your actual CPU traffic or number of customers visiting the app. That also went live, as well as some new monitoring and alert capabilities. So lots of stuff that's gone live in the last 2 weeks. And generally, I think one of the things you also see just from the developer space, in particular the Windows Azure space, is we're kind of on a cadence right now where we're shipping updates every month. On the Windows Azure side, it's about every other week now. And hopefully you just kind of continue to see both the service and our products continue to get better and better. Those updates add new features, they fix bugs, they tweak capabilities based on your feedback, and hopefully enables a very agile pace that we can kind of continue to make, hopefully, your lives better and enable you to do even more faster. So with that, let me kickstart things and start answering some questions that people have submitted. So again, go ahead and submit your questions, and I'll try to do a couple of different categories at a time. So again, if you answer a question I don't answer immediately, it's not because I'm skipping it. It's basically I'll try to bucketize a couple of categories all at once, answer as many in that category, then move on to another category. So let me start actually with a few Azure questions. Brian Hall asked, Azure table storage, what's the latest news? Coming out of Bill, I heard exciting news about iQueryable support as well as JSON and core support. When can we see the bits and see some documentation on it? The best way to probably learn more about some of the things that are coming, Brian, is to watch a talk done by a guy named Brad Calder on my team at Build. I think he did a talk on Windows Azure storage, and specifically talking about all the improvements coming in storage and some of those capabilities. There's a bunch of stuff that he talked about, I think, demoed as part of the talk. You mentioned a couple of them, including JSON and core support, as well as iQueryable within Link. Other improvements that we're making, I think we announced that we're now geo-replicating Azure queues, which means that if in the event of a complete data center failure, your queues are replicated along with your table and block storage now to a different data center that you can use. We talked about cores and JSON, which is great for client and device apps, access and storage. And there's a bunch of other features that I think he disclosed, including the ability to ship physical drives to us, to upload storage, and a bunch of other things. And so if you watch that talk, he'll talk more and give you a little bit more details and pointers about how you can learn more about that. Pull up other questions on Azure. Casey asked a question about the Active Directory service in Windows Azure. Is it meant for me to be able to use even in a small site with a few thousand users instead of local database users, or is it intended for network business? Good question, Casey. So we have a feature within Windows Azure that we call Windows Azure Active Directory. And the way to think about that is, in some ways, think about it as a Active Directory in the cloud. So it allows it's an identity service that you can store users and identities within, and then you can authenticate and authorize access based on those. And you can use Windows Azure Active Directory in a couple of different ways. One is as a standalone directory. So if you're like a small business or you don't have any on-premise servers, you can create a directory tenant and you can stick your users in it. And then just enable that for single sign-on within your apps. What makes Azure Active Directory unique is that you can do both that as a standalone service, but also you can connect it to your on-premise Active Directory as well. And what that means is if you're an enterprise or a business that has Windows Server and you're using Active Directory within your intranet, you can set it up so that your intranet users also automatically replicate in the cloud. And what that means then is you can have a single set of users that you can use both to log in on premises as well as use for your cloud-based apps. And your cloud apps can be done either, like, say, an ASP.NET app or a .NET app that you're running. You can use Windows Azure Active Directory to do single sign-on into it. And that can be either for a small site or an enormous site. We're also then supporting Windows Azure Active Directory as of today, where you can now do single sign-on with things like Salesforce.com or Google Apps or Office 365. So that gives you now a way that you can have a single directory in the cloud and use it to do single sign-on for both your corporate apps that you build as well as other SaaS-based solutions that you license. So it ends up being really powerful. The nice thing about Windows Azure Active Directory is it's free, so it doesn't cost anything to use. And it's free to replicate your existing on-premise directory too as well. So it ends up being kind of a nice ingredient service that gives you a way that you can integrate security in a very deep way. So, other questions here. Willem asked a question, what's the best way to move TFS projects to Azure? A couple different things you can do. One is, if you're looking to just kind of lift and shift your existing TFS infrastructure, you can run TFS within a Windows Azure virtual machine. And that's probably the easiest way if you just want to move your build environment or your source environment into the cloud. What you can also do is take advantage of our Team Foundation service, which is a service that we run that runs on Azure. And what that lets you do is you don't have to have build servers, you don't have to have virtual machines. We run all that infrastructure for you and run it basically as a service. And so it's much easier to set up. And you don't have to do the management or backups, we do it for you. That service is available today. Right now it's limited to, I think, 5 users per project. What you'll see a little bit later on this year is we'll open it up so that you can start to do builds for many more users, and you can basically move your entire TFS infrastructure to the cloud if you want to. And so both of those options are available and are things that you can start taking advantage of now. Quentin asked a question, when are we going to see a preview of the Windows Azure tools for VS 2013? We just came out with Visual Studio 2013 at the Build Conference. Unfortunately, one of the things that we don't yet support is the Windows Azure Platform as a Service tool. So in other words, if you want to build a cloud service project. But I believe the plan, Quentin, is for that to be live later this month. Or at least in the next 4 weeks. So that should be showing up shortly, and you can start taking advantage of that as well. Other quick questions. Andre asked a question, which options can we use to do streaming in Azure? I think this is specifically related to media streaming. We have with Windows Azure a media service we call Windows Azure Media Services, which allows you to do streaming in the cloud. And it's available with what we call general availability today. And so with Windows Azure Media Services, it's kind of cool because you don't have to run your own virtual machines. It's instead kind of what we call platform as a service or PaaS service that runs in the cloud. So it's self-managed for you. And it allows you to upload any amount of video in any format. We then can run encoders in the cloud for you automatically and encode it into whatever format you want. And the media service infrastructure also then includes origin servers so that you can stream that, again, using whatever format you want. It could be smooth streaming, it could be flash streaming, it could be HLS if you're targeting iOS endpoints, or others. And basically our streaming endpoint servers will stream it for you in the cloud. So that's available today in what we call an video on demand mode or VOD mode. That basically means if you have pre-recorded video, you can stream that. And so you can start using that immediately. We're also going to be standing up a live streaming service later this year. And that will allow you to like record an event, like if you're recording a conference or something like that. And then basically we can encode the video in the cloud and then stream it dynamically as well to any device in any format. And so that'll be coming online a little bit later on this year as well. Invar asked a question, will we ever be able to use the SQL profiler with Windows Azure? I think specifically this is with Windows SQL database or Windows Azure SQL databases. It's a good question, Invar. I believe the plan is yes, although I don't know the time frame for that. That feature is actually built by the SQL Server team, but I believe that is on their roadmap. But unfortunately, I don't know the time frame. You can certainly use the SQL profiler though with Windows Azure virtual machines with SQL Server inside. And so that is another option, but I believe the plan is also to enable SQL databases to use it as well, using the platform as a service approach. Tiago asked the question, what are the plans for making Azure SQL databases ISO compliant? What is the time frame for that there? I don't know the time frame on that, Tiago, but if you send me mail, I can hook you up with the SQL team, and we can try to understand and hopefully know the roadmap for that soon. Let's see. Let's see. Alistair asked a question: are there plans for Windows Azure virtual machines and default domains with 3 or more member sets? For example, to support MongoDB replica sets where you have a recommended minimum of 3 servers. It's a good question, Alistair. And if you send me mail, I can probably hook you up with someone that is working right now on some MongoDB scenarios. There's a couple of different ways that you can try to do it. The answer is we have a notion we call availability sets, which you can place virtual machines into. And with an availability set, we basically guarantee kind of isolation levels where we protect against network failures like top rack switches, virtual machines, server failures, as well as rack and power failures. Right now, I believe when you add an availability set, we basically guarantee that we place the machines over 2 what we call fault domains. So we guarantee that we have at least complete isolation across those machines in a 50-50 way. Now what you can do is you can create a virtual network and have multiple deployments that each then have availability sets within them. That might be another approach that you can use to further segment and isolate your deployment units so that they're on separate machines. But if you send me mail, I can find out for sure for you and hook you up with someone that knows the answer to that. C-Sharp Coder asked if nobody saw the integration of Azure settings and configuration directly into the VS 2013 IDE. Do you plan to continue to integrate all of Azure config into VS? There's a couple things that we showed at build. One is some support we added into the tools, both within Server Explorer as well as within websites within a configuration tab, where directly inside the IDE you can look at your runtime settings and you can kind of download logs and do things like that. And in general, yeah, you are going to see a lot more tooling support to make those types of dev scenarios a lot easier. The other thing that we're working on is supporting the ability to much more easily change and configure settings that are different between dev time and runtime, so that you can easily actually have a different configuration settings or different production-only settings that you don't want to check into source control, or frankly you might not even want to share with your development team for compliance or isolation reasons or security reasons. And so that's something else that we're working on, is making that process whereby you can change runtime configuration, or you can configure runtime configuration a lot easier. So that's something else we're going to integrate even more within both Visual Studio and TFS. Quinn asked a question about caching. Will it be possible at some point to have a dedicated cache that runs in a separate deployment from the app itself? This sort of, for caching today, it's a little confusing. We have what's called a shared cache, which is basically kind of a system where we still run, but we don't necessarily recommend it anymore, where we kind of have a multi-tenant cache where multiple customers could basically store their data in a single cache. Generally, the reason we don't recommend it as much anymore is what we found is a lot of customers, because it's multi-tenant, could run into a situation where if a customer got busy, it would ping the cache a lot, and it could impact the performance from other customers. We solved that by creating what's called a dedicated cache, which you can now run within a cloud service, which is specific only to your application and gives you isolation, full isolation, and full control. And we've had a lot of success with that, and I'd say most of our big customers are now using that as a way to kind of dramatically improve the performance. And it's a distributed cache, so it runs across multiple machines and can survive app updates and things like that. The question the feature Quinn is asking for is, can you take that dedicated cache and can you run it in what's called a separate deployment, so that you could have potentially multiple applications share the same cache, but they're all your applications, so you have control over it, and where you can version the app independent of the cache. That is something that we're working on. and you'll likely see an update later this summer that enables that. And it'll be API compatible with the existing dedicated cache. So it's just changing your connection string is all it takes. It doesn't require any code changes in order to take advantage of it. A couple more Azure questions, then I'll move on to some .NET ones, then we'll come back to Azure. Matt asked a question, do you know of any success stories on Azure with non-standard MVC frameworks like Fugu MVC? Good question, Matt. I certainly know of a lot of success stories on Azure that are using non-ASP.NET MVC frameworks. The beauty about Azure is it lets you run pretty much any .NET app written in any framework, any .NET server app written in any framework. And so, I don't know off the top of my head specific customers who are using Fugu MVC, but I do know of customers that are using a variety of different MVC frameworks, including even non.NET ones. The nice thing about Azure is Fugu MVC should just work with Windows Azure websites. You should be able to use it inside a virtual machine, and you should be able to use it inside a cloud service. So, from that perspective, I think you should be able to use it everywhere. Ryan asked a question, what's the difference between Windows Azure Mobile Services and Windows Azure Data Services? What makes Windows Azure Mobile Services particularly useful for mobile developers? Good question. The Windows Azure Mobile Services is a service that we provide. We just released it in general availability, which means it's got an SLA, and it's officially released now. And it's a pretty nice service. It allows you to very easily create a mobile backend for your client applications, or cloud backend for your client applications. So you can do it for Windows 8, Windows Phone apps. You can do a backend for an iOS app or an Android app. So and even an HTML5 app with quarters and JavaScript. So you can literally create a backend for anything. And what's nice is it allows you to basically offer data. So you can sort of do CRUD-like operations. So it does provide kind of a data service capability. But it also does push notifications. It has built-in cron job support, so you can run background tasks. It provides built-in authentication for a variety of different authentication providers like Google and Facebook and Microsoft IDs and Twitter IDs. So if you want to build kind of a phone or a tablet or any kind of client backend, it provides a really nice way that you can do so. And the pricing model is pretty flexible in that you basically pay by the API call. It locks up millions of API calls, so it's like literally per API call. And so it's a pretty cost-effective way to get started, literally for free. And then you can scale up your apps as your app traffic grows. And so it ends up being kind of a nice model that we think works pretty well for a lot of the kind of mobile apps that are coming out, where you can kind of dial up and dial down resources based on your traffic. C-Sharp Coder asks, where can one find best practices around using Azure for allowing developers to spin up server scenarios for testing and temp work? Basically, I want to be able to allow developers to use Azure for cloning a server set, spin it up, and do some testing, check it out in the bits, then blow it away and start again. Would Azure work for this, or would an in-house Hyper-V be best? Azure works pretty well for this now. A couple of reasons why it works well. One is we now move to a pay-by-the-minute model. So you no longer need to pay up for an entire hour. You spin something up for 10 minutes and shut it down, you're only paying for 10 minutes. We've also no longer charge you when you shut down your VMs. In the past, when it was Azure, if you didn't delete your deployments, it would still charge you. Now you can spin up VMs, run them, turn them off, and we no longer charge you for compute time. If you stored stuff on disk, we'll still charge you kind of for what you stored on disk, so that's pennies on the month for pretty much any business or for any standard disk size. And so it ends up being a very cost-effective way that you can spin up and spin down resources elastically. So I definitely would recommend checking it out. There's a bunch of PowerShell scripts that we have that I'd recommend taking a look at. that I think have helped in terms of learning more about that. If you can't find those, feel free to send me down any pointers to where you can learn more about them. Other Azure ones here, and then we'll go to some VS.NET ones. Ryan asked the question, is it possible to use Azure mobile push notifications with Arduino or NetDuino? I don't know, to be honest with you, Brian. Right now, we integrate with a Windows notification system, which is what Windows Phone and Windows 8 uses. We integrate with the Android push notification system, which is what Google supplies, and we integrate with the Apple push notification system, which is what Apple uses for iOS. I don't actually know what Arduino or NetDuino uses for their push notification. If they integrate with one of those three, then it'll work. If they integrate with something else, it probably won't. Willem asked the question, when deploying WCF services to Azure, are all WCF protocols available? If you enter your certificates as well as your names over SSL, can this be hosted in Azure? Yes, I believe you should be able to use all protocols. Actually, I should preface that. It depends on how you're deploying the WCF app. If you're deploying it within a virtual machine or a cloud service, I believe you should be able to use all protocols. We support HTTP as well as binary, protocols or just straight TCP, so that should work. If you're deploying within a Windows Azure website, we only support HTTP and will shortly support web sockets. And so as long as you use one of those two protocols, you're okay. But if you use a VM or a cloud service, you can use anything. Okay, let me do one last Azure question, then I'm going to move on. We'll do some .NET VS ones. And then as people ask more Azure questions, I always come back and do more there as well. So just asked a question, what is the status of Azure Data Sync? When will it go live? If you can send me mail, Justin, I don't own the Azure Data Sync. That's part of the SQL team. But if you send me mail, I'll be happy to put you in touch with folks on that team that can give you an update on the timing on that. And if you could also include details on the errors and warnings you're seeing, that would be really good. And I'd love to put you in touch with that team so that we can learn more on that. So let's switch gears now and talk a little bit about .NET and VS. Jeffrey asked a question, what's the theme of the next version of .NET? What new features can we expect to see in the future? Good question. So there's the new release is coming out this year. We just put the preview out, which is .NET 4.51, as well as the Visual Studio 2013 release that goes with it. There's a bunch of blog posts, including by, there's one from the CLR team, which kind of summarizes nicely all the things that are in .NET 4.51. In general, I think it's a pretty nice release, in the sense of there's a lot of things in there pretty much for everyone. So lots of improvements up and down the stack. There's not it's not like a major brand new foo capability kind of release. It's instead just really trying to react to feedback up and down the stack, making a ton of things better. And they range from, async performance, rounding out async so that, for example, like with the Entity Framework, you can now use async. That gives you the ability where now you can be completely async on the server side as well as on the client side. So you could have a client app, use async, call into a server, now WCF, Web API, Web Forms, MVC can now be async. And now the Entity Framework data code can now be completely async as well. So that you can literally have async all the way from the client to the server to the database tier, completely async. The big benefit of the async support is kind of was first introduced with the last release, is just the scalability and the performance improvements that you can get. It really enables you to build much more scalable, high throughput apps. And in the past, we tell people, hey, you really want to scale to async, but it was kind of frankly a pain to write async code. It can be very error prone in the past because you have to kind of manually handle and work all these async APIs. the ability to use the async and the await keywords directly inside your C# code or your VB code, I think really provides a nice, clean way to do it. And I think this new .NET release really does a great job of balancing that out. Lots of improvements around web APIs, again, both client and server, including OAuth, and lots of improvements to ASP.NET. One of the nice things we did with ASP.NET is we have now a notion we call kind of one ASP.NET. And so instead of having thousands of different ASP.NET project templates, you have just really one project template, and you say, hey, I'd like to add in Web API and Web Forms and MVC, or just one or two of those frameworks. You can have a Signal app that basically you can compose any of these things, Signal R, etc., in a nice, clean way. Lots of tooling improvements up and down the stack, whether it's with IntelliSense and the code editors, whether it's with some of the web design, web tooling improvements around CSS, HTML editing. We've added virtual Signal support for Web API tooling support, scaffolding for web forms, so you can data train UI data in web forms support. Data improvements. Other data improvements include the ability to use stored procedures with Entity Framework code first, which is an ask a lot of people have had, as well as just a bunch of other great Entity Framework improvements. Lots of web forms and MVC improvements, some WPF improvements, including some other nice tooling improvements around data binding. Gosh, a bunch more. Those are just a few of them, but in general, I think it's a pretty nice release and a bunch of cool things to take advantage of. Peter Shaw asked a question, I think, related to some of those improvements I mentioned. The new MVC 5 template, which is what we shipped 2 weeks ago, now includes Twitter's Bootstrap framework. This is Bootstrap's open source framework that was developed by Twitter, but it's open source now. And it enables you to build what's called responsive design UI, or responsive UI, meaning you can build scalable UI in HTML that scales from like a 30-inch monitor down to an iPhone or a Windows 8 phone and a browser. And so you can design your UI so that it doesn't just sort of shrink down, but you actually kind of adaptively modify the navigation and the interaction so that it fits best on the form factor that you're targeting. And so it's, we think it's a great framework. It makes it a lot easier to build kind of modern UI apps that work with all browsers and all form factors. Peter's observation is, hey, it's yet another open source thing you're doing. That's really cool. What are your plans long term in terms of open source? I think the ASP.NET team in particular, as well as the Entity Framework team and the Azure team, have really kind of embraced open source, I think, in a pretty deep way. And so, one of the things that we're pushing the team, and one of the questions that I ask the team whenever we start something new is really, do we need to do this, or is there something else already out there that we should be embracing? And really make sure that we're asking ourselves the question, whether it's with JavaScript frameworks, whether it's with CSS frameworks, like Twitter Bootstrap, or with JavaScript frameworks like jQuery, whether it's with JSON serialization frameworks like JSON.NET. A couple of other big things that we included as part of the next release of ASP.NET is O1 integration, which is an open source .NET web server extensibility API that we're embracing now and integrating into ASP.NET. And so, is there something out there that we should be integrating with as opposed to kind of implementing our own? And how do we embrace the ecosystem? How do we do things like NuGet and push NuGet as a way that we can make it easier for .NET developers and Visual Studio developers to consume open source libraries, not just ones from us, but from other people? And then lastly, how do we make our own stuff open source? And so with things like MVC, with things like Web API, with things like Signal R, with things like Entity Framework, we're also releasing our own code under an open source license. with the permissive platform license. You can run it not just on Windows, but you can even run it on Mono on top of Linux. And so these are all things that we're pushing pretty hard. I think when we first did it, people kind of were almost a little freaked out, like, my gosh, why is Microsoft doing this? Are you killing something? No, we're definitely not killing anything. We're basically doing it because we kind of want to remove a reason why some people choose not to use our software, because it's not open source. And we want to improve the developer experience by being able to say, we're still going to build our own features, and we're still going to innovate in our own ways. But at the same time, if there's something else out there that's really good, like jQuery, or whether it's like Bootstrap, Computer Bootstrap, let's not duplicate what's already out there. Let's embrace it and make it work best with our stack. That's kind of the reason why we've embraced the open source. I think we'll embrace it even more going forward. And I'm kind of excited about that. There's not a fixed roadmap per se about, here's what's coming next. A lot of it is we're just trying to keep an open mind as we look at all of our investments. Again, I kind of ask my team whenever they build something new, say, hey, should we release this under an open source license? Ask the question, why not, as opposed to why. If there's not a good reason not to release that library under an open source license, why don't we just do that? And I think there's a win for everyone when we do that. Matt asked the question, is there any chance of getting similar data mining that is in WPF added to Windows Forms? Good question. Unfortunately, I don't own the Windows Forms team anymore. I used to a couple of years ago, but I haven't for a while. So I don't know exactly the roadmap plans there. I believe there are some improvements that we've added to Windows Forms this release. I don't believe it's full WPF data binding support, but definitely kind of submit suggestions with user voice on the forums. And I do know the team keeps an eye on that list, and it'd be good to kind of understand what they might be able to do. Bill Walter asked a question, why was the setup type project removed from Visual Studio 2012 and 2013? What's the easiest workaround for deploying Windows Form type applications with VS 2013 or 2012? It's a good question, Bill. I actually don't know why that was removed. That was actually, both those releases were since I moved to Azure, so I don't remember the exact context. You can send me an email, though, at scottgu@microsoft.com. I'd be happy to put you in touch with someone from the Visual Studio team, and hopefully they might be able to provide a suggestion on what best to do for that scenario. Seed asked a question, what's the single most important thing we will be able to do in VS 2013 that is not in VS 2012? That's a hard one. A lot of it depends on, it's kind of which of your children do you like best. That's a hard one. There's lots of good things. I would say the things that I am enjoying the most, I'm going to cheat, maybe mention three. I think the ASP.NET stuff I think is really cool. All of the web editing improvements I really love. One of the cool ones I didn't mention actually that I think people like is the ability to browse with multiple browsers. So you can actually, you've always in the past been able to say, oh, use Chrome or use IE or use Firefox when you do F5. But now you can actually say do Chrome and IE and Firefox all at the same time. And VS can launch all three. And there's a pretty cool browser synchronization feature. We're calling it browser link right now inside VS. So that with a single keystroke, you can also refresh multiple browsers that you've launched your app with. And we use SignalR under the covers to connect Visual Studio with the browser. One of the things that's cool about that is it's a really nice productivity win. It's a really great way to do web development. So I think that's pretty cool. I think also the Git support that is now built into Visual Studio is pretty nice. It's available as kind of a preview form or out of band for VS 2012, and it's a lot richer in VS 2013. And if you use distributed source control or you want to play around with Git, it's a pretty cool way to use Git, and it's some pretty sweet directly integrated support. And you can use that now with TFS. You can use it with GitHub, you can use it with Bitbucket, or any local Git repo. And I think that tooling support is pretty nice. Those are just some of mine. I'm sure there's others that have other preferences. So he asked the question, what's the story on Blend? I understand it's now, the designers have built into VS. So one thing we've done with Blend is the core Blend designer is now a XAML designer that's directly inside the Visual Studio IDE. And so the cool thing about that is when you double click on a XAML file, you're loading up the Blend design surface inside Visual Studio. And so that was a change that we made with VS 2012, and enables much richer XAML editing support. With 2013, there's even more XAML editing capabilities being added as part of that. And then the other thing I think we do with Visual Studio, I believe it's Pro and higher, it might be Premium and higher, I can't remember, it's probably Premium and higher, is we also include Visual Studio Blend, we also include the Blend tool as part of the Visual Studio suite. And so if you still want to use Blend as a standalone tool, you can do that as well. We do it here again. So John Nowak asked a question specifically around a sample app that looks like you upgraded and you're using Ninject, you're getting controllers not have a default constructor error. And it's an MVC4 Web API sample. A couple things to look at, John. One is to make sure, like right now when you set up a dependency injection, you register it separately for both Web API as well as MVC controllers. And so you might be getting that error because you registered only for one and not the other. And so make sure inside global.sax that you have a dependency resolver set for both. And there are two separate statements you want to have. If that doesn't fix it, send me an email and I'd be happy to put you in touch with someone on the team who could probably help debug it. Other questions? Nancy asked the question, is there somewhere on the roadmap a plan to converge frameworks for Windows Phone and Windows 8? There is a bunch of kind of consistency between the two right now. They both use XAML, they both use .NET, they both use C#. There are some differences. Right now, we're not, we don't have anything to discuss in terms of further convergence. But I do think there's between Windows 8 and Windows Phone a great deal of convergence now. And I think in general, you're going to see us continue to kind of enable you to kind of build apps that run across both of them in the future. Let's see. Let me see if I get a few other .NET ones that I'll come back to some of the Azure ones that people are popping up. Basically asked the question, considering globalization and localization with MVC4 for moderate to large websites, is the resource technology the right one to go with? Or should we base more of a client-side work? Good question. I don't know 100% the answer to that. A lot of it depends on your app. A lot of it depends on whether your resource streams, are they static things that you want to compile, or are they going to be pulled or stored within a content management service or CMS? If you shoot me now, I can put you in touch with the team. And there might be someone there that has a better set of recommendations to look at. That's a good question. Willem asked the question, will there be an update to Prism, that's the Meth and IOC containers? Any news on that? I don't know exactly what the plan is with that patterns and practices framework. So unfortunately, I don't know the answer to that. I believe Prism was a client-side framework for the WPF, if I remember. I don't unfortunately know what that plan is there. Other questions on the .NET ES side? Steve asked the question, what's the release schedule of ES Next? We just shipped the preview of ES 2013 and the new version of .NET about 2 weeks ago. Given that the product is called ES 2013, I will leave it to your imagination as to what year that might be released in. But if you guess 2013, it probably would be correct. But I think the plan is to release it later this year. And again, it's in preview form today, so you can download the preview. But I don't think we've given any more guidance as to specific months that it's going to be released. But based on the name, I think you can probably assume it's going to be this calendar year. Costas has a question, is there plans to fix the lack of side loading of apps in Windows RT or Windows Phone for the enterprise? Unfortunately, I don't know the plan for that. I'm going to have to defer to the Windows team on that. It might be good to look at some of the build talks from 2 weeks ago. They might go into a little bit more detail on that. Other questions around single-handedly guide the .NET framework in a utopian world. Where would you like to see the framework go from here? In a utopian world. I think a couple of things I'd like to see us continue to do on the .NET side. One is I think there's I think these are things that we are going to be looking at even more. Things like integration with kind of micro framework-like support. I think you're seeing this a little bit today with the Owen work that we've added into ASP.NET Next, where we're basically allowing you to, hey, if you want to use ASP or Web API, or you want to use some of these frameworks without needing to even have a web server, it's kind of we were kind of designing the framework so that you can be kind of a micro framework and plug in just the pieces that you want. I'd love to see us continue to do that across .NET because it starts to enable you to have small, easily composable pieces that you can take advantage of as a developer just for the scenarios you need in a very lightweight way. I'd love to see us do that more. I'd love to see us continue to push hard in the open source space. Coming from on the Azure perspective, one of the things that we're also focusing a lot on, I think you'll see in .NET even more in the future, is a focus around manageability and debuggability and traceability on the server side. So then when you're in kind of a production environment, how can you go ahead and very easily turn on instrumenting for your code and get a lot of insight and then turn it off? Or how can you instrument and log or trace your code so that you can easily debug it in a production environment? I think for a lot of us that have come from kind of a more traditional development background, we're used to debugging meaning either you attach a debugger or you use unit tests to kind of verify behavior. Both of those are totally applicable at dev time. In a cloud environment where you might have thousands of servers or you might have millions of concurrent connections, you really can't just sort of attach a debugger. And that's where things like traceability and logging and instrumentation play a much bigger role. And so I think that's a space where I'd love to see us also embrace within CLR and within our framework libraries a way to make it easier. Raju asked the question, should web service developers embrace Azure in the cloud to progress? In general, I'd say, I think every type of developer should embrace the cloud. And I think web services in particular are really kind of designed for the cloud. The cloud is designed for them in the sense of, it makes it dramatically easier to reach broader audiences, and having the scaling capability of the cloud, I think, is a great fit for any type of integration or web service-like scenario. Let's do a couple other .NET ones, then I'll go back. Steve asked, what's the plan after ES 2013? Don't know. If I didn't know, I can't tell you. We're just focusing on ES 2013 right now. Brian asked a question, you turn off the Windows 8.1 start button. I don't think you can, but you don't have to push it. But in general, I enjoy having the start button back. Hope you do too. Will asked a question, .NET reporting. We're still using Crystal and standalone offline reports. What's the recommended plugin there? I don't actually know the exact recommendation on reporting. I believe it's SQL reporting services is probably what we recommend. If you shoot me mail, I can hook you up with a team that knows for sure, though. Maybe get an answer for you. Do one or two more server ones, then we'll go back to client or to Azure. Peter asked a question. I know we have Mono that's available cross-platform, but does Microsoft have any plans to take .NET cross-platform? Not right now that we've talked about. We don't. We partner very closely with the Mono team, and so I think that's been a great a great relationship where they support a variety of different platforms, and then also Xamarin with their Xamarin capabilities. They now also support the ability to use .NET for development of both iOS as well as Android apps on the client side, which is also something worth checking out. Indoor asked a question, will my son need to know JavaScript? It depends on what he's doing, I guess. If you're building an HTML app or a web app or a web client app, then probably yes. JavaScript would definitely be worth knowing. On the server side, knowing how you can have a .NET app talk to a JavaScript app, I think is certainly useful. I don't think we're mandating you to JavaScript, but it probably is very useful for any kind of web scenario. Obviously, we're seeing with native apps or client apps, whether they're built with .NET or iOS, with Objective-C or with Java and Android, or something like Xamarin, where you can use C# with both Android and iOS. You're certainly seeing client development. I think mobile development take off in a big way, and so I do expect we'll see more and more usages of pure client apps. But certainly, I think for web-based apps and browser-based apps, JavaScript is super useful. Other questions? Move back on to Azure a little bit. Brian asked, what conference on September 3rd to 6th celebrates its 20th anniversary are you attending? Embarrassed to say, I'm not sure. Is this Technic? Are you taking down Australia? I don't know.
Yes.
Okay, yes, yeah. It's like a trick question. What conference am I attending? I'm just drawing a blank as to what I'm doing that week. I think I'm going to be in Tech in Australia and Tech in New Zealand that week, or some week and around it. And so I guess it's the 20th anniversary, which is great. So I'm going to be doing the launch note, which I think is the final keynote, the ending keynote in Tech in Australia, and I'm doing two breakout talks. One is Azure there, and I'm doing the keynote in Tech in New Zealand and 2 breakout talks. And so looking forward to being there. I think it's been 6 years or maybe 5 years since I've been back there. So definitely looking forward to having the chance to go back and visit. And it should hopefully be a lot of fun. Let's see. Gary asked the question, what are some real-world problems that the new Azure point-to-site VPN functionality solves? The point-to-site is something that I blogged about, I think, in May, or maybe actually late April. So if you go click my blog, you can find a blog post about it. It's a pretty cool technology that lets you very easily stand running in the cloud. And so if a classic example would be, let's say you're doing dev tests. So in other words, there's 5 developers on your team. Some of them might be working remotely, or some of them might be working behind a firewall, let's say within an enterprise environment. What you can do with a point to site is you can stand up a virtual network within Windows Azure, add virtual machines to it, and you can set up the virtual private network so that no public IP address is exposed. So in other words, there's no way for someone outside the virtual private network to actually connect to it. The virtual network to connect to it. And then what you can do is you can stand up a VPN, or a virtual private network endpoint gateway, that your dev machines can then connect to, and then they can access any of the individual machines on the virtual network. And so it provides a really nice way that you can set up effectively your own private network that only the developers on your machine, or developers within that you want to grant access to, can access. And then you can use remote desktop and things like that. And the nice thing about the point-to-site stuff is it's really easy to set it up, and it integrates nicely with your Windows VPN clients, so that you can go ahead and just double-click and easily connect into it in a really easy way. So, Brian reminded me, the last time I was there in Tech Day Illustrated Museum was 2006. So it was actually 7 years ago. I'm getting old. So that's cool. I'm more excited to come back now. Let's see. Casey asked me a question. Point to site VPN is incredibly good, except it's more expensive than Hamachi. Are we planning to adjust the price? I believe actually the pricing for the point to site network, creating a virtual network in Azure is free, and you can add virtual machines to it. I believe the way our pricing works for the VPN is you pay by the minute, and I think it prorates to about 6 cents per hour. So, if you run it for a full month at 700 hours a month, I believe it ends up being like base price is under $40 a month in order to have a virtual private networking. There's no per user fee, so you can then I think add up to 200 users onto the virtual private network. So the other thing to keep in mind about all the features inside Azure now is if you have an NSDN account, you get a bunch of free credits that you can use for dev test purposes. So if you're using a virtual private network capability for dev test, you can basically, if you have like a VS Ultimate subscription, you can basically spend $150 a month on that virtual private network, which should be enough to basically have your entire dev team connected without having to pay anything, I think. So that might be something just to take a look at as a way also from a cost mitigation perspective. But even if you don't have a dev test license, I think the core virtual private network is like $40 or less per month. That's a one-time fee regardless of how many customers or how many developers you connect to it. Let's see. Thanks, Willem, for the nice comments there. I appreciate that. Costas asked a question. Do we have a solution or technology in .NET that can be used for big data, mass analytics, storage, processing? Do you support or recommend any particular NoSQL database? Good question, Costas. We do have within Windows Azure now a service we call HD Insight. It's a Hadoop service, so it's based on the open source Hadoop distribution. In fact, we submit patches to Hadoop now directly, and it supports MapReduce. It's a MapReduce. Hadoop's probably one of the more common MapReduce or big data kind of solutions out there, and so it allows you to very easily scale out and do MapReduce jobs, and you'll be able to use HD Insight against any of our storage systems. So you can use it against blob storage. Today we support that, and we'll support both table storage, which is a key value NoSQL implementation, as well as SQL databases in the future. And that'll allow you to MapReduce anything. And you can write your MapReduce jobs in a variety of different languages, including .NET. Traditionally, Hadoop has been Java-based, so we support Java as well. But we also then added our own .NET extensibility API so that you can write your MapReduce jobs in .NET. You'll see us do even more with that service in the future. Let's see. Jackie asked the question, what happened to Jason Zander? Where did he go? So Jason and I were kind of, I guess, between us, ran most of the dev a couple of years ago. And so I kind of managed the .NET teams that he managed, as well as some of the VS teams that he managed. The core VS team as well as the TFS team. We've actually both now work on Windows Azure. So the cool thing is I actually work, again, very closely with Jason on a day-to-day basis. And so he's one of my counterparts in Windows Azure. And so we're basically on the same team again, working day in and out. We still run pieces of .NET in Visual Studio, so things like ASP.NET, Entity Framework, WCF, Workflow, Web API, SignalR, all of those server-side frameworks are part of our team in Windows Azure, so that they've always been part of our team. And the VS tooling that goes with them also is part of our team. The core Visual Studio team, the languages teams, and the CLR team are still indebted, though, and so we partner very closely with them. Other questions? Jeffrey asked a question, is there a method in place to run a Jenkins-style network for in-unit testing and MS builds on Azure, sitting on machines and tearing them down when needed? Good question, Jeffrey. We support with the Team Foundation service the ability to very easily stand to do builds and testing in the cloud. And so we have kind of a finished Team Foundation service that runs as a service inside Windows Azure today. And so you can certainly do that today. And we do continuous integration, continuous deployment as part of that, including a build server. And so the beauty about that is you don't have to run your own VMs. We run the VMs for you. We do all the management of the VMs for you. You just submit, and you just check your code, and we'll do the build, we'll run the tests, and report the status. If you want to use something like Jenkins or TeamCity or any other continuous integration kind of workflow, you can do that too, and you can run that inside Windows Azure virtual machines. So I do know a number of people. I think Eric Hexter has blogged about how they're doing it on his team, where they're running their TeamCity inside virtual machines and managing it that way. So you can certainly do that as well. If you run your virtual machines using your MSDN subscription, you get a huge discount, so you can run with a discounted price. There's like a 33% VM discount. And then you can also use your MSDN credits towards those. So, if you've got, you got a VS Ultimate subscription, you can basically just get a VMs, and for, $150 a month at the discount, you can probably run, 3 VMs, 16 hours a day for free. Actually, for $150, you can run 3 VMs for free on 31 days of the month at no cost. And so you could use that for your Jenkins or your continuous integration environment as well. So lots of different options there you can take advantage of. Bill Walter asked a question. Seems like Windows Azure technically could easily provide an RDS API type service, but as I understand it, the licensing does not allow that type of use. Why have that limitation? That's a good question, Bill. What you can do today is you can spin up Windows Server, and so if you wanted to create your own VM and have your users remote desktop into it, you can certainly do that. The licensing does support that. What a lot of people ask for is, hey, can you also run kind of Windows client licenses? Right now we don't have licensing mechanisms in place that lets you necessarily easily do that. And there's a bunch of kind of just sort of licensing things that we're working through. It's something I'd love to be able to enable in the future, but right now the Windows client license doesn't allow you to do that. With us, I don't think with anyone else either. People ask, does Microsoft have any plans to support cluster and or parallel software building, compiling, and future dev tools? And are we likely to see Visual Studio in the cloud before long? I think what you're referring to in the first part of that question, Peter, is around cloud compilation. And I mentioned earlier some of the work that we're doing with Team Foundation Service. Our TFS service is around making it a lot easier to do that. So that is something that we're looking at enabling and doing compilation in the cloud. And I think you'll see us continue to evolve our compilation models within Visual Studio to support even more parallel compilation and code generation. As systems are increasingly going more multi-core, that's something a lot of people ask for, and that, to some extent, will also allow for even better cloud compilation as well. And to some extent, I do think the vision of our Team Foundation service in the cloud is, to some extent, kind of a PS in the cloud from a back-end perspective. And then we're making it really easy to use Visual Studio, the client tool, against that. Nancy has a question. Do you have any plans to put in a feature where users can open up ports on the VM in Azure like Amazon allows us to do? We actually do have that feature already today. So if you create a virtual machine in Azure, you can choose any ports that you want to open up to the outside world. By default, we lock them down just for security reasons. I mean, we just allow RDP by default, and we pick a random port to put it on just so it's hard for people to guess. But you can basically open up any port today that you want to, just as you can with AWS. Richard asked a question, what tools are available for testing apps that run in the cloud? How can stress and load testing be simulated with tools in the cloud? There's a couple different ways that you can do that, Richard. One is you can certainly spin up virtual machines in the cloud, and then you can point them at anything in order to do load or stress testing. And so the same mechanisms that you use today to do that on-premises or with your own virtual machine running Hyper-V, you can do now inside Windows Azure using our infrastructure as a service capabilities. The other thing that we're doing, and we started talking about this earlier last month at TechEd, and you'll see even more details about this emerge, is adding into our Team Foundation service, which is our cloud-based service, or cloud-based dev test services. We are building in stress and load testing support so that you don't actually have to spin up your own virtual machines to do that. You can go ahead and, I think what they demoed in the TechEd keynote, Brian Harry, you can kind of go to a portal, point at your app, set up a load distribution, effectively say, run, and it will go ahead and stress test your app and then aggregate the results. And the beauty about that is we're managing all the infrastructure to do that for you. We can provide much more of a finished service, which saves you a lot more time and money. So I think you'll see us kind of continue to make that even better in the future. Ryan asked the question, where are we heading with the .NET Micro framework? Will we see it emerge in wearable tech? It's a good question. I don't know all the plans right now with the .NET Micro framework. That team hasn't worked for me for a couple of years. It's very cool tech, but I'm not actually sure exactly right now what the plans are. I do think the whole wearable computing movement is a pretty cool one. And so, I've got a Fitbit and some other devices that I'm using. It's kind of cool how all this information and all this stuff ties together. And I do think also just the explosion that we'll see in terms of new data being generated over the next couple of years is going to open up a bunch of interesting use cases and analysis that will, affect both business and our own personal lives. And so, having kind of personal wearable devices that are logging and kind of aggregating this information, I think will be interesting. The C# coder just posted saying that Agent Watch is now a .NET Micro Framework device. You can go to http://agentwatches.com to learn more. And the last question right now on the list is, what's my favorite drink? Well, I tell you, at the end of one of these after talking for 90 minutes, I feel like I use one. What's my favorite drink? Well, I like Scotch-based drinks, I guess. I guess that would be my favorite cocktail if I have one particular preference, or beer also works. And lastly, Brian said, before we end today's great Q&A, is there any other news you want to highlight? In terms of, I mentioned a little bit at the beginning of the talk in terms of some of the things that have just come out in the last 30 days, but I usually say this in most of my talks, mostly because I think it's true. And I do think it's hopefully a good time to be a developer, and I think both in the .NET and the Azure space, we've got a lot of stuff that's just shipped, a lot more stuff on the horizon that's about to ship, and my hope is people are starting to see, and you can start to feel some of the momentum in terms of some of the things that are coming out, and some of the pieces that are starting to fit together in a much cleaner, nicer way. And I do think that's going to open up a ton of new possibilities for developers, and in particular, developers using .NET and Visual Studio. I'm pretty bullish about what the next couple months, the next couple of years hopefully brings. So, last question someone asked is, how is my time divided between .NET and Azure these days? The past year or two, I'd say my time has been maybe 80% on Azure, or even 90% at times. There's a bunch of stuff that kind of been kicking off and getting going. Having said that, most of the apps built on Azure are built with .NET. So even though I kind of think of that as Azure time, most of those frameworks and services that we're launching in Azure directly relate with .NET as well. And part of why I've been excited about Azure and part of the continuity that I've kind of tried to bring in my job has been, how do I build the best cloud for .NET developers out there? And Azure's used by more than just .NET, but I think there's different clouds out there, whether it's Heroku for Ruby or others for different languages where, different languages or frameworks have had kind of their cloud, quote unquote, that have been optimized for their language or framework. I think with Azure, we've gotten to a point with some of the releases we've done just in the last couple of weeks where, we've got a pretty damn good cloud for .NET now in Visual Studio, and you're going to keep seeing it get stronger and stronger. And I think that's going to mean that for any .NET developer, whether you're a server developer, a .NET developer, or a client developer that wants to build a backend for your client app, we have a really strong value proposition for you. And I think there's a bunch of interesting use cases, whether it's with mobile, whether it's with analytics and big data, whether it's with media, whether it's with dev test, that we're opening up, and developers that previously might not be taking advantage of those themes or doing those scenarios now have a really rich, easy way to do it. And so, I'm pretty bullish and excited about what the future's going to bring.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Scott, for your 16th appearance here with us. I think we probably crossed more than 1,000 questions now, since you on average go well and truly above 100 questions per session. And without a doubt, it's the most questions any of our presenters have ever gone through in total. So, yeah, thank you very much for your time and for coming in here to us and answering all of these sometimes right-wing, left-wing questions from our members.
Thanks for having me. It's been fun, and looking forward to more of them.
Definitely, very much so. All right, thank you, everybody, guys. This concludes another one of Guthrie's Q&A sessions. If you have any questions, fire them through to info@lidnug.org, or chase down Scott Guthrie on his Twitter. It's of course twitter.com/ScottGoo. I think we had a slide in here quickly with some things. There we go. There is also Scott's weblogs, or his blog, and of course his Twitter line. Again, thank you everybody, and I hope we see you again soon.